Steering his decrepit old Fiat Uno left onto Dereham Road, Albert Sparks brought his eyes off the unlit road ahead to glance down at the fuel gauge to find the needle resting firmly in the red. "Shit!" he cursed, lifting his foot off the accelerator to further reduce his speed. He still had over 15 miles to go before reaching Swanton and the post office where he was supposed to be working the early shift. That was also where the next petrol station was, if it was even open. "Why the hell didn't I fill it up yesterday?" he asked himself, shaking his head in furious dismay as he returned his attention to the virtually pitch-black road ahead. He knew why he hadn't. Until his next paycheck, which wasn't due for another 9 days, he didn't have enough money to make his monthly mortgage payment, let alone all the bills that kept constantly piling up. His philosophy to just stick everything onto his various credit cards wasn't going to work either. All 3 had maxed out 2 months before, leaving him barely able to pay the interest on each. Subsequently, it was hardly surprising that he'd been putting off filling his car to the very last minute. The problem was, the very last minute had been the previous day, when he'd driven straight past his local petrol station on his way home. When the car juddered suddenly underneath him, he was left gripping the steering wheel with ever-whitening knuckles. "Not now," he muttered, creeping slowly past the last of the road's few sporadic houses to enter what he knew to be a mile-long stretch of deserted woodland. Thinking if he could just make it to Swanton Morley, the next village along, that he might then be able to find someone who was both willing and able to give him some petrol, he reduced his speed even more, only to remember the time. It wasn't even 4:30 in the morning. There wouldn't be a single soul about, and he was damned if he was going to start knocking on people's doors at that time, using his jerry can as some sort of plastic begging bowl. As the idea came to him that there was a slim chance that the village's newsagent would be open, the car juddered alarmingly again. "Oh, come on," he muttered, urging it on with nothing more than the power of his panic-stricken mind. "Just another half a mile and I'll be there." The moment he said it happened again, but this time, instead of spluttering back into life, the engine fell into a motionless, unwelcome silence. "Shit!" he shouted, in furious dismay, banging the steering wheel with his fists before steering reluctantly to the side of the road. As it rolled to an eventual standstill, he tried turning the key in the ignition, but it was no use. It wasn't going to start. Trying to make it would only drain the battery, which was already on its last legs. Turning the lights off, he wrestled the key out to think what to do. He couldn't call for breakdown assistance. He wasn't a member of any organisation, nor could he afford to be. He briefly entertained the idea of waiting for a car to flag down, only to remember the time again, and that he hadn't seen a single other vehicle on the road since leaving his house. His only realistic option was to grab the empty plastic jerry can from out of the boot, to traipse the half-mile or so to the next village, in the hope that the corner shop would be open. Not that they sold petrol, of course, but someone working there may be willing to lend him some. Enough for him to at least finish his journey. Having made up his mind, he shoved open the car's squeaking, rusting door to be met by a cold, sterile silence. Without the lights from his car, the road was as black as pitch. He could barely see the trees he knew lined the road on either side, let alone where he'd been intending to start walking to. Trying to ignore his growing sense of unease, as if 1,000 eyes were watching him from the surrounding trees, he skirted his way cautiously around to the boot. Once there, he lifted it open, when a far-off scream came tumbling through the air like a sharpened axe being dragged along some distant concrete floor. When it eventually trailed slowly away, he drew in an anxious breath. "What the hell was that?" he eventually asked himself, his eyes staring down the dark, shadow-filled road towards where he thought the sound had come from. With his heart pounding inside his chest, he held his breath to listen, but there wasn't a single sound to follow, just the hollow silence of the still, pitch-black night.